Hey Kyle, how's it going? It's Yanni here. Just looking at your work for last week, as you requested a little bit of a review. Hope any of the comments kind of like that I give you might help you think about some things. But no, it's looking really nice. You've got kind of like a good set of, beats, all kind of like laid down. I agree with a bit of Eric's comment that, the body mechanics needs a little bit of help, but that's everyone to an extent. I'm having trouble with that myself. But things that I can see straight off, kind of like the beat, things that you can do to make your character seem a little bit more feminine is, for example, when you're around frame 70, her pose, especially when she's turning, notice how wide her feet are. And girls tend to be more closed like this, kind of like in a V shape type of stance. Remember as well the fact that guys tend to pull their weight from their shoulders and girls tend to move their weight from their hips. So, the way that the movement is different. So actually when you go into the turn, she actually has kind of like a nice drift move from frame 140. And I just take this little lean in that she does. She kind of like shifts her weight a lot on frame 187 through to about 202. And there's just this sway off to the side as she's kind of like adjusting her weight. And I think with that, you could almost just have that movement perfectly smooth and settle into a stop. Um, the other things that jump out at me a little bit, staging wise, is there's a lot of turns in this when she's really looking off screen constantly a lot. You've got one on 263, you've got one also on when she looks at frame 332, sorry. And in frame 32, I think this is kind of like quite an important moment because she's engaging with him at that moment in time. It's almost you want the eye lines to be looking up, looking down, and you want those two eyes to meet. So really think about having the face, pretty much in silhouette. You're pushing like to here, and we're losing all of the emotion on the face on that side. So that's one of the things that you can do, to actually make it look a little bit better. So going through the body mechanics and frame by framing it a little bit, one of the things that jump out at me is, let's have a look. He grabs his hand. Currently you've got a bit of drift, so his hand actually doesn't contact her yet. You still need some frames in there, but I'm pretty sure you're aware of that. So when he grabs her hand and he brings it up, I think there's two motions there. One of them is turning her around, the other one's rising the hand up, and you want to almost break those two beats up clearly. So there's one that pulls and the other one that brings the hands up, just because that way, you get two separate actions, her turning and then her engaging with him as she looks around. Currently it's all happening at the same time. You kind of like lift her hand up to here, and it's kind of like quite an exaggerated move. It's almost like if she was gasping or anything, it feels a bit more natural for the hand to be down here on the actual chest instead of way up here near the throat, okay? And yeah, just really think about getting her in silhouette there and having them both, pretty much, side by side on screen so that they're actually both looking at one another and engaging, with that a little bit clearer. Also, when, she turns away from him, she does that kind of like quite violently as well. There's this big arm swing as well. I think you can tone that down and that would keep it a little bit better. So it's almost like if she drops his hands and then turns, is a bit more feminine to a degree. So, that idea of dropping, turning, that should sweeten it up a little bit more. And then that happens round, so in frame round about 57, have him drop the hands in a couple of frames, and then just delay that turn. It also means that you can cut out a bit of the settle that you've got where she looks back, where you've got this frame, this movement on frame 78. She looks back at him to 99. You could possibly, just get rid of that at all completely and just leave her kind of like listening to him but not looking at him. And then you do this very quick arm raise in frame 106 all the way through to 115, and that continues into the next frame. But I think you can delay that action in the cut. So really what you can see is that you can see in the cut before the arms just rising up a little bit, rise her shoulders up a little bit so the hand's just there, and let her complete the gesture here, and also keep kind of like the pose of the hands a bit more outwards than that, you know. So if she's actually going to be holding herself, have her kind of like holding herself, play around with the arms, look for some gestures there where she might be doing something, you know, with her hands and keeping them active in that shot, okay? And she comes towards screen. I think also here around frame 132, you can have him do a little bit of a head nod to just one side like that, so he's looking at her again, because again, he's very much in the same pose, but it just can be something that he's just looking over kind of like her shoulders. Think about a bit of his thought process in that in frame 132, and just have him lean over a bit more. You've got a little bit of it, you know, a little bit later, but I think it can come in just a tad bit earlier and be a bit more exaggerated. Keep the pose that he's in a little bit more appealing, because he's kind of like, you know, completely and utterly straight. It's good for him to be subtle, but you also want to sell, you know, the idea of, okay, what's he thinking while he's hearing this? That's kind of like the thing that I'd say. And just as soon as you make one of those decisions, you know, you'll get a pose that will, you know, just sell that idea. And if he holds in that pose and does very little, it'll work. Um, Also with her, I think here, you know, you need a few more eye darts in this section around here, especially around, you know, frame 184. Let me just listen to this for a sec. Yeah, right in all the way in 180, all the way to 225. This big gap here. Here's where you can really play in some eye darts and really get, you know, kind of like the emotion of what it is that, you know, she's thinking about, you know. And it's like those little things, like little memory kind of like thing, question, and then kind of like, you know, keep the eyes kind of like just doing things to really show that she's actually thinking, you know, about what she's saying. And again, when she turns back, you know, this turn here, you really want to cut as soon as she starts turning. So really you can delay the turn a few frames, does that make sense? But really, you know, from the point where she turns around, you know, in frame 242, that's the position where you want to cut. You don't want all of this kind of like look over the shoulder and him, you know, rising his hand up. He can do that in the next cut. And again, you're jump cutting here as well, which is that you're kind of like in the same angle, you know, from one shot to another. So really, you've got him over the shoulder, and you cut, you know, and all of a sudden it's on him. You get the same emotion from him in the same shot. So really, you're kind of like cutting where you don't have to an extent. It could be an idea that you cut to, you know, do a jump cut to push into him and show a certain reaction to his emotion. But currently, it's, you could frame this differently, or you could just leave, you know, the over the shoulder shot, you know, with her as an option as well. It's a bit confusing, but it's kind of like one of those things that you can play scenes out in various ways. But I think that this cut here isn't really adding a lot to the actual shot itself. And again, this rising of his hand and scratching his head, you know, one, it goes up pretty quick. Okay, you can do that a bit slower, show a bit of kind of like, you know, easing in, especially at the top, you know, because it's kind of like really linear. Right now it's just going up like that. It would be like, well, you know, and kind of like think about, you know, the ways that he could actually touch his head as well to make them a bit more personal. So they're actually kind of like, you know, there's a bit of rotation here in the hand, or just think about things like that. So rather, instead of just sticking like this, try thinking a bit more about the personality and just thinking about what you can do with those hands, you know, and keep him kind of like very, very, very kind of like subtly active with what he's doing. So you can sell a lot there. And then with his other hand gesture as well, you've got that as well. You know, he comes up and it's a bit kind of like cliched to an extent, where he's like this, you know, he thinks, well, that's the way the cookie crumbles. But even, you know, if the idea is there, starting off with the cliche, then we can sell it in different ways, because his gestures might be specific, you know, kind of like, well, that's the way the cookie crumbles, you know, or he does something, you know, that's just a little bit more personal there, and that can get the, you know, just in making each time that animation just a little bit more kind of like fresh to look at. So yeah, so I think that's pretty much it. You know, you've got everything else seems to be, you know, nice and solid. You know, you've got nice beats of when everything's happening. I think just as, main summary, I'd say, things that can make you work a little bit better is, kind of like, especially some of the pauses, getting moments like the contact to work. Those are really, really, really important moments, where you're just going to have to spend more keys in actually making that feel real. And then try to avoid, losing the eyes in the shot. That would be kind of like the main thing that I'd say. You've got loads of head turns and stuff like that. Good to have them, but keep the eye lines focused and cut as soon as you'd get to a point where you actually lose the eyes on her, especially. Okay. Well, I hope it's useful, man. Great work, and thanks for letting me have a look at it. Okay. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.